She needed some time off, my mom said with that cheerful tone she used when she was about to drop a bombshell. I stood there at San Diego International Airport, staring at my Aunt Cheryl's overstuffed suitcases beside my parents' matching luggage set. The custom tags I had ordered 3 weeks ago with their names embossed in gold letters suddenly felt like a cruel joke. My name is Kayla Donovan. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a software consultant here in San Diego. I had spent the last 4 months planning what I thought would be the perfect surprise for my parents, a fully paid 7-day luxury vacation to Australia. It was my way of saying thank you for 20 years of unwavering support through my career struggles, my messy divorce, and every triumph along the way. They deserved something extraordinary, but standing there in the departure terminal, watching Cheryl adjust her oversized sunglasses while complaining about the airport coffee prices, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't how I had imagined this moment. I had pictured my parents' faces lighting up as I handed them their boarding passes, not this awkward family reunion that nobody had consulted me about. "I thought this trip was for you two," I said, barely managing to keep my voice steady. The boarding announcement for their flight echoed overhead, and other passengers were already lining up. Dad shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. "We thought you wouldn't mind, sweetheart. Besides, Cheryl's had a really rough year with the job market and everything." Cheryl jumped in before I could respond. "I've been so stressed, Kayla. You know how hard it is for someone my age to find work. Your parents are just being thoughtful." She said this while examining her freshly manicured nails, which somehow didn't match the image of someone who couldn't afford basic necessities. I looked at the travel packets in my hands, meticulously organized itineraries that I had crafted with the help of 3 different travel agents. Business class seats that I had specifically upgraded for my parents' comfort. Private tours of the Sydney Opera House and the Blue Mountains that were booked under my name and required my identification. The scenic helicopter ride over the 12 Apostles that I had splurged on because Dad had mentioned wanting to see them from above. None of them knew about the careful planning, the personal touches, or the fact that everything was tied to my name and credit card for verification purposes. They saw it as just another vacation, easily transferable to whoever needed it most. The boarding announcement came again, more urgent this time, and I realized this moment would define everything that came next. Growing up, my parents Gregory and Linda Donovan had been the foundation of everything good in my life. They were both retired educators who had spent their careers shaping young minds in San Diego's public school system. Dad taught high school mathematics for 32 years, while Mom dedicated herself to elementary education, specializing in helping struggling readers find their confidence. They approached parenting the same way they approached teaching, with patience, wisdom, and an unwavering belief that everyone deserved support. Throughout my 20s, when I was bouncing between entry-level tech jobs and trying to establish myself as an independent consultant, they never once made me feel like a burden. When I moved back home for 8 months after my divorce, they welcomed me with open arms and helped me rebuild my confidence. They celebrated every small victory in my career and offered guidance during the inevitable setbacks that come with entrepreneurial life. But there had always been one complicating factor in our family dynamic: Cheryl Lambert, my mother's younger sister. At 61, Cheryl had perfected the art of playing the victim while avoiding any real responsibility for her circumstances. She had been between jobs for the better part of 3 years, living off a combination of unemployment benefits, family loans, and what she called temporary financial assistance from anyone willing to provide it. The pattern was always the same. Cheryl would appear at family gatherings with elaborate stories about promising job interviews that mysteriously fell through, or demanding employers who didn't appreciate her unique skill set. She had a master's degree in communications, but claimed the industry had changed too much for someone with her experience. She applied for positions sporadically, usually ones that were either far below or far above her qualifications, then complained when nothing materialized. What frustrated me most was how my parents enabled her behavior. They saw her struggles through the lens of their teaching experience, always believing that with enough support and encouragement, anyone could turn their situation around. They didn't see what I saw. The designer handbags she somehow afforded. The expensive salon treatments she prioritized over job interviews. The way she conveniently had family emergencies whenever temporary work became available. Mom had mentioned Cheryl's latest crisis during our last phone conversation 2 weeks ago. Something about her landlord raising the rent and how stressed she was about making ends meet. I had listened sympathetically, while privately noting that Cheryl's rent problems seemed to coincide perfectly with her decision to take a long weekend in Las Vegas the month before. Still, I had never imagined that my parents would make such a significant decision without consulting me. The Australia trip wasn't just a vacation. It was my expression of gratitude for everything they had given me. I had wanted to share that experience with them, to see their faces when they experienced the Sydney Harbour Bridge at sunset, or watched kangaroos in their natural habitat. Now, as I watched Cheryl check her reflection in her phone camera, I realized that my parents viewed this gift very differently than I did. The boarding process began, and I handed over the travel documents with a smile that felt like it might crack my face. The tickets were printed with my parents' names, along with the confirmation numbers for everything I had arranged. As they headed toward security, I noticed Cheryl struggling with her oversized carry-on bag, complaining loudly about airline restrictions. "Have an amazing time," I called after them, and I genuinely meant it for my parents. They deserved this trip, even if it wasn't unfolding the way I had envisioned. But as I walked back to my car, something shifted inside me. The initial shock was giving way to a different emotion. Not anger exactly, but a cold clarity about the situation. I sat in the parking garage for several minutes, thinking about the conversation I had just witnessed, and the assumptions that had been made. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Thank you again for this incredible gift. We'll send lots of photos." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Enjoy every moment. What my family didn't know was that this trip was far more complex than handing over plane tickets. Every element had been carefully coordinated and required verification that I was the primary guest. The luxury car service in Sydney had my name and identification requirements. The boutique hotel in Circular Quay had my credit card on file and specific check-in procedures. The private tours I had arranged through Oxbend Technologies' corporate travel division were non-transferable without advance notice and proper documentation. Most significantly, the scenic helicopter tour over the 12 Apostles that I had splurged on as the trip's highlight required all passengers to be pre-approved with passport information and emergency contacts. I had submitted only my parents' details weeks ago, and the aviation company's insurance policies were strict about last-minute changes. As I drove home through the familiar streets of San Diego, I thought about the irony of the situation. My parents had taught me the importance of personal responsibility and following through on commitments. They had instilled in me the values of hard work and integrity that had built my successful consulting practice. Yet somehow, when it came to Cheryl, those same principles seemed to evaporate. I spent the evening reviewing my travel insurance policy and the terms and conditions of every booking I had made. By midnight, I had a clear understanding of my options and the likely consequences of the unauthorized passenger change. I also had my laptop open to flight booking websites, exploring some interesting possibilities for my own immediate future. The next morning, I would wake up to frantic phone calls from Australia. But tonight, I poured myself a glass of wine and began researching luxury resorts in Queensland. If my carefully planned family vacation was about to become Cheryl's free ride, perhaps it was time to plan something even better, just for myself. The first call came at 3 a.m. San Diego time, which meant my parents had been in Sydney for exactly 6 hours. My phone buzzed insistently on the nightstand, displaying Dad's number. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message with growing satisfaction. "Kayla, honey, we're having some trouble here. The car service won't release the rental without you being present to show identification. They keep saying the booking requires the primary guest to verify everything. Could you call us back when you get this? We're kind of stuck at the airport." The second call came 20 minutes later, this time from Mom's phone. Her voice was strained with the kind of exhaustion that comes from dealing with bureaucracy while jet-lagged. "Sweetheart, There seems to be some confusion about the hotel reservation. The front desk manager says they need you to confirm the booking personally or provide written authorization for us to check in. Cheryl is getting really upset, and we don't know what to do. The lobby is full of people, and we just want to get to our room. I listened to both messages while brewing coffee in my kitchen, watching the sunrise paint the San Diego skyline in shades of gold. The coordination issues I had anticipated were unfolding exactly as expected. Every premium service provider I had selected required strict verification procedures, especially for the level of luxury accommodations I had arranged. The third call came as I was checking my work emails. This time it was a three-way call with both parents and Cheryl's voice clearly audible in the background, growing increasingly shrill. "This is ridiculous," I could hear her shouting. "We flew halfway around the world just to sleep in an airport? Your daughter obviously didn't know what she was doing when she booked this trip." Dad's voice was apologetic when he came back on the line. "Kayla, I know this is a big mess, but is there any way you could call these companies and authorize us to use the services? Cheryl's right that we can't just spend the week wandering around Sydney without accommodation." I took a sip of my coffee and considered my response carefully. The terms and conditions of every booking were crystal clear about authorization procedures. As a software consultant, I understood the importance of security protocols and verification systems. These weren't arbitrary rules. They existed to prevent fraud and protect both customers and service providers. "I'm sorry this is happening," I said, and I truly was sorry that my parents were experiencing stress. "Let me see what I can do from here." What I didn't tell them was that I had already spent the early morning hours on the phone with my travel insurance company, documenting the unauthorized passenger change and exploring my options for recovering the costs of the trip. The representative had been sympathetic and thorough, explaining that I had grounds for a full refund since the original terms of service had been violated. I also didn't mention that I had just finished booking myself a first-class ticket to Queensland, departing that afternoon. While my family dealt with the consequences of their last-minute decision, I would be enjoying the luxury resort experience I had originally planned, but this time designed entirely around my own preferences. By noon San Diego time, I had received 7 more calls, each one more desperate than the last. The private tour company had canceled their Sydney Opera House experience when they couldn't verify the guest list. The Blue Mountains excursion was postponed indefinitely pending proper documentation, and the helicopter tour over the 12 Apostles had been canceled entirely due to insurance liability issues with unregistered passengers. As I packed my suitcase for Queensland, I thought about the lesson my parents had inadvertently taught me. Sometimes the most generous gestures are also the most vulnerable to exploitation. But sometimes, when people take advantage of generosity, they create opportunities for even better outcomes. My flight to Brisbane departed San Diego at 2 p.m., and as the plane lifted off, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in months. I had upgraded myself to first class and chosen a window seat, where I could watch the Pacific Ocean stretch endlessly below us. The flight attendant offered champagne, and for the first time in days, I felt genuinely excited about the adventure ahead. During the layover in Los Angeles, I received a particularly frantic voicemail from Cheryl herself. Her voice was a mixture of outrage and desperation that would have been comical if it weren't so revealing. "Kayla, I don't know what kind of games you're playing, but this is completely unacceptable. Your parents invited me on this trip, and now we're stranded in Australia with nowhere to stay and nothing to do. I've had to use my emergency credit card just to buy food at the airport. This is affecting my credit score, and I can't afford these kinds of unexpected expenses. You need to fix this situation immediately." The irony wasn't lost on me. Cheryl, who had been too stressed to look for work but apparently not too stressed to book a last-minute international flight, was now lecturing me about financial responsibility. She had managed to find the money for plane tickets and emergency expenses when it suited her, but had spent months claiming poverty whenever anyone suggested she take on temporary employment. I deleted the voicemail and switched my phone to airplane mode. 18 hours later, I landed in Brisbane to sunshine, warm temperatures, and the kind of tropical atmosphere that immediately melts away stress. The resort I had booked for myself was everything I had hoped the original Australia trip would be. Elegant, peaceful, and designed for genuine relaxation rather than family drama. My suite overlooked the Coral Sea, with a private balcony where I could watch dolphins play in the crystal-clear water. The spa offered treatments I had only dreamed about, and the restaurant served fresh seafood that made every meal feel like a celebration. For the first time in years, I was traveling purely for my own enjoyment, with no obligations to manage anyone else's comfort or expectations. On my second day, while enjoying a massage that erased months of work tension, I received a text message from Mom that made everything clear. "We're flying home early. This trip hasn't worked out the way we expected. Cheryl is very upset about the accommodations, and we think it's better to cut our losses." I read the message twice, then put my phone away and returned to my massage. They were giving up after 2 days in one of the world's most beautiful cities because the luxury amenities I had arranged weren't accessible to their uninvited guest. Instead of adapting to the situation or finding alternative accommodations, they had chosen to retreat. That evening, as I sipped a cocktail on my balcony and watched the sunset paint the ocean in shades of pink and gold, I realized that this solo vacation was teaching me something important about my own boundaries. For years, I had prioritized other people's comfort over my own needs, making sacrifices and accommodations that were rarely acknowledged or appreciated. The Australia trip I had originally planned was about expressing gratitude, but this Queensland experience was about reclaiming my own sense of adventure and independence. I was rediscovering the joy of making decisions based purely on what would make me happy, rather than what would keep everyone else satisfied. Tomorrow, I plan to take a helicopter tour of the Great Barrier Reef, something even more spectacular than the 12 Apostles experience I had arranged for my parents. This time, there would be no complications, no unauthorized passengers, and no family drama to diminish the wonder of the moment. The helicopter tour over the Great Barrier Reef exceeded every expectation I had harbored. Flying above the coral formations in perfect weather, with a knowledgeable pilot who pointed out marine life and geological features, I experienced the kind of awe that makes you understand why people become addicted to travel. The water below us shifted through impossible shades of blue and turquoise, and I could see sea turtles and rays moving through the coral gardens like living art. As we touched down back at the helipad, I felt profoundly grateful, not just for the experience itself, but for the series of events that had led me here. If my parents hadn't made their last-minute decision about Cheryl, I would never have discovered this resort, never have taken this particular tour, and never have had the freedom to structure my days around pure enjoyment rather than family obligations. That afternoon, I posted my first Instagram photo from the trip, a shot of my feet on the private balcony, with the Coral Sea stretching to the horizon and a tropical cocktail in the foreground. The caption read, "Sometimes the best adventures are the ones you take alone. Learning to prioritize my own happiness has been the most valuable lesson of the year." Within hours, the photo had received dozens of likes and comments from friends and colleagues who had been following my career journey. Several people mentioned how refreshed and happy I looked, which made me realize that the stress of managing everyone else's expectations had been more visible than I thought. My phone showed several missed calls from my parents' numbers, but I wasn't ready to engage with the aftermath of their decision. Instead, I spent the evening at the resort's wellness center, participating in a sunset yoga session that left me feeling more centered than I had in months. The next morning brought a series of text messages that revealed the full scope of the Sydney disaster. Mom's messages were apologetic and confused. "We never realized how complicated the bookings were. Cheryl thinks you planned this to embarrass her, but I know that's not true. We should have discussed the change with you first." Dad's message was more direct. "We made a mistake, and I'm sorry. Cheryl's upset about the money she spent on the flight, but that's not your responsibility. We hope you can forgive us for not thinking this through." But it was Cheryl's message that revealed her true character. "I know you did this on purpose to make me look bad. You're just like your mother's family, always looking down on people who are going through hard times. When I get home, I'm going to make sure everyone knows how selfish and vindictive you really are." I read her message twice, then blocked her number. The threat to damage my reputation with family members was exactly the kind of manipulative behavior I had observed for years, but never directly experienced. She couldn't accept responsibility for the consequences of her last-minute intrusion into someone else's carefully planned gift, so she was trying to reframe the entire situation as a personal attack against her. That evening, I had dinner at the resort's finest restaurant, where I ordered the seafood tasting menu and paired it with an Australian wine that the sommelier recommended. As I watched other solo travelers and couples enjoying their meals in the elegant dining room, I realized that I had stumbled onto something transformative. This wasn't just a vacation anymore. It was a blueprint for how I wanted to live my life going forward. The resort experience had shown me the value of investing in experiences that genuinely brought me joy, rather than constantly sacrificing my own preferences to accommodate other people's needs or expectations. Tomorrow would be my last full day in Queensland, and I was already planning my next solo adventure. On my final day in Queensland, I decided to document the full scope of my solo Australian adventure. I spent the morning taking photos at every beautiful location within the resort. The infinity pool that seemed to merge with the ocean, the tropical gardens where rainbow lorikeets posed obligingly for pictures, and the spa pavilion where I had discovered the restorative power of genuine self-care. Each photo told a story of independence and joy that contrasted sharply with the chaos my family was experiencing in Sydney. I wasn't being vindictive. I was simply sharing my authentic experience of what a well-planned Australian vacation could actually look like. The piece de resistance was a photo from my helicopter tour over the Great Barrier Reef, showing the vast expanse of coral formations and impossibly blue water stretching to the horizon. I had asked the pilot to take the shot, and it captured both the helicopter's interior and the breathtaking landscape below. It was the kind of once-in-a-lifetime experience that people dream about, but rarely achieve. I crafted the Instagram post carefully, choosing words that expressed gratitude and personal growth rather than criticism of anyone else. The final caption read, "Sometimes the universe redirects your plans towards something even better. This solo adventure to Queensland has taught me the importance of designing experiences around your own values and priorities." The Great Barrier Reef helicopter tour was absolutely magical. Every bit as spectacular as I dreamed it would be. Grateful for the reminder that the best company you can keep is sometimes your own. Within minutes, the post had received more engagement than anything I had ever shared. Friends and colleagues were commenting with messages of support and admiration for my independence. Several people mentioned that my posts had inspired them to book their own solo travel experiences. The contrast with my family's situation was now fully documented across my social media presence. While they had spent their Australian vacation dealing with logistics problems and accommodation issues, I had been experiencing the country at its absolute finest, exactly as I had originally envisioned. The flight home to San Diego gave me 18 hours to process everything that had happened and prepare for the conversations that awaited me. I felt remarkably peaceful about the entire situation, which surprised me. A week ago, I would have been anxious about family conflict and eager to smooth over any hurt feelings. Now, I simply felt clear about my boundaries and confident about the choices I had made. My parents were scheduled to land in San Diego 2 hours before my flight arrived, which meant they would have time to decompress from their travel experience before we spoke. I had decided to reach out to them directly and have an honest conversation about what had happened and what it meant for our family relationships going forward. Cheryl, on the other hand, had made her position clear through her threatening text message. She viewed the entire situation as a personal attack designed to humiliate her, rather than the natural consequence of changing someone else's carefully coordinated plans without permission. Her inability to take responsibility for her role in the Sydney disaster told me everything I needed to know about her character and her approach to family relationships. The most important realization from my Queensland experience was that I had been undervaluing my own needs and preferences for years. The solo vacation had shown me what genuine relaxation felt like when I wasn't managing other people's comfort or mediating family dynamics. I had discovered restaurants I loved, activities that brought me joy, and most importantly, a sense of confidence about making decisions based purely on what would enhance my own well-being. As the plane began its descent into San Diego, I looked out at the familiar coastline and felt excited about returning home. For the first time in years, I was coming back from a vacation, feeling genuinely refreshed and energized, rather than exhausted from family obligations. The experience had taught me that sometimes the most generous thing you can do for the people you love is to model healthy boundaries and authentic self-care. As I settled back into my San Diego routine, I reflected on how dramatically my perspective had shifted in just 1 week. The Australia trip that began as an expression of gratitude had transformed into a masterclass in personal boundaries and the importance of protecting your own well-being. Looking ahead, I knew my relationships with family would never return to their previous patterns, and I was grateful for that change, because it meant I could finally prioritize my own happiness without guilt or apology.